This is Starting Point, a podcast that tracks Guyana's unprecedented growth from all vantage points. Join your hosts, Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif, as they dive deep into the heart of topical issues.
Welcome to another episode of Starting Point. I'm Fariza Hanif. I know I've been missing for the past two episodes, but I was a bit under the weather. But now I'm back in full strength. I'm joined by my beautiful host, Kiana Wilberg, who's been holding the fort down for us. And today we have a very special guest for you. Most of you will know him as the former Minister of Business under the APNU+AFC administration, Mr. Dominic Gaskin. Mr. Gaskin, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, Fariza. Good afternoon, Kiana.
Good afternoon,
and thank
sir.
you very much for having me on your podcast.
It's a pleasure.
And good afternoon to all your viewers also.
Yes. So, Mr. Gaskin, before we get into the deep end of politics, I know a lot has been happening. Most of us want to know what have you been doing? What have you been up to these past 5 years, I should say?
Okay, well, let me start by telling you what I've not been up to, because you introduced me as a former minister and politician, and that's absolutely correct. But since 2020, I have not been involved in politics, meaning I have not been a member or a supporter of any political party. And I am still not a member or a supporter or a candidate for any political party. So I'm here as a private citizen, and I'm a jeweler by profession, and that's mostly what I do these days.
Okay, great. So now we could get into the rest of the discussion, but I think you take some pride in saying that you're not a member in any of the listed candidates.
And I'd go a step further. I also have no political agenda, zero. So my views are entirely my own, and they're probably shaped like anyone else's on my own preferences and maybe biases, but they're my own views, and I'm not promoting any particular political entity or even political position.
Okay, great. Thank you for that disclaimer. We appreciate that. So I want to start off first about your tenure rather, in the APNU+AFC administration. You were the Minister of Business for 5 years, 2015 to 2020. Now, over the past couple of months or a few, since 2020 rather, the APNU+AFC came in for a lot of criticisms, things that they would have done during their term in office. But we're mostly interested in your assessment of their track record and what they did or what they didn't do or what they should have done.
Okay. Like any government, there are, I guess, positives and negatives associated with their time in office. A few positives, because I'm not going to just go down a whole list of things, but what, jumps out to me, we held local government elections for the first time in over 2 decades. I consider that a positive outcome for Guyana, on a national level. Also, the naming of new townships in hinterland areas. So there was Lethem, Bartica, Madia, and Mabaruma. I also consider that significant and positive. Paved roads in many of those hinterland communities. Again, Lethem and Madia, Mabaruma in particular, where there were none before. There's a lot more to be done, but I thought that was a start, and I see that work is continuing, which is good. So I consider that another positive. More disposable income for working people through income tax relief. And this was done by making NIS contributions deductible, for instance. We've forgotten about that. Raising the threshold modestly. Also introducing a more progressive way of computing income tax, so that you didn't just have one flat rate once you met the threshold. There are two rates and a different way of calculating the deductible or the allowance. We reduced VAT from 16 to 14%. It may not sound like much, but I still believe that's a positive. I think a major accomplishment, which also does not get much discussion or attract much attention, is the referral of the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy to the ICJ. That did not happen by accident. It was the result of a number of very deliberate actions taken on the part of the government at the time to, first of all, let me just backtrack. The Geneva Agreement names the United Nations Secretary General as the person who must decide on how the matter is to be resolved if the parties can't resolve it among ourselves, in a nutshell. So the plan was to bring the matter to the attention of the Secretary General of the United Nations, and that took quite a bit of work. Mm-hmm. And when that was finally accomplished, he then, instead of referring the matter to the ICJ as we were petitioning for, he appointed a personal representative for a 1-year period to sort of act as a go-between between the two parties, Guyana and Venezuela. And if there was no significant progress within that time frame, then he would refer the matter to the ICJ. So finally, in I think December 2017 or January 2018, somewhere thereabouts, the matter was finally referred to the ICJ. So just getting it there to that forum where there can be this final juridical settlement of the issue that Venezuela has raised, challenging and asking contending that the arbitral award of 1899 be null and void. Just to get it there was a process, and it was not an easy process. It took a lot of work to get it there.
Yeah,
and that, I think, is an accomplishment. It's been 8 years probably now, almost. And I'm looking forward to a decision in our favor maybe next year when we can all celebrate that outcome. So those are some of the main things that I can think of. And on the negative side, there were some initial blunders that I've mentioned before. I'll mention again. That salary increase within the first 4 months. I think that was politically short-sighted. It could have waited. It could have been made retroactive at the end of the year. It could even have waited a year. But that was done too quickly, and it looked bad, and it was political stupidity in my view. The drug bond issue, where the Ministry of Health entered into an agreement with someone to rent what was little more than a house for $12.5 million a month. That, while there was a rationale that was plausible to a certain extent, it was obviously a setup, and it was, it was, I like nice word is scampishness, You just take one look at this is a scampish deal. Something is wrong here. And, it wasn't thought through. I don't know if it was thought initially that it could be kept under the radar. Cabinet was not in favor of it, but I believe by the time it came to Cabinet, it was already a done deal. And one of the reasons it was brought to Cabinet was because they may have woken up whoever the brains behind that scheme must have realized that there was not enough money in the budget for that year. So we had to go to Parliament for supplementary. And
that's how it
really came out. But that was another major blunder. On the policy side, I think we lost a lot of support for things like VAT on private education, which may have had some good intentions, but perhaps I believe we should have consulted more with the public first and got an idea of the kind of feedback we would get on that. It was later rescinded, but the fact is that we did it, and I think we got some flack for that. And then there was VAT on internet services, which I think is just bad policy. If you're talking about encouraging innovation, entrepreneurship, you want to, appeal to the younger generation. I think that was bad, especially in an economy such as ours. VAT on electricity and water, that didn't go down well, though there was a threshold, but I think having a threshold above which you pay VAT is a good idea. But what was done in our case, once you reach that threshold, you paid VAT on the entire amount, which does not really incentivize responsible consumption of electricity or water. But in terms of promoting a greener agenda, I think it's good to identify a certain level, or below this,
correct,
you don't pay VAT. If you consume above this, you will pay VAT on the difference.
Right.
So that could have been a winner, but it didn't turn out that way. It wasn't done the right way. Gaisuku, I think that was, and just let me be very clear, I support what our government did in terms of closing the estates and consolidating the operations of Gaisuku to 3 estates. But we did lose a lot of support for it. It probably could have been handled better also in terms of how the displaced workers were perhaps integrated into the economy, or maybe it should have been preceded by a year of training or preparation for what today we do have a labor shortage. We have a shortage of, truck drivers. We have a shortage of
laborers,
welders, general laborers. So, we should have been able to foresee what was, in the pipeline and start preparing, those workers, for this new economy. So from that perspective, I think it could have been handled better, but one has to realize also that Gaisuku was a drain on the economy at a time when we simply did not have the money. Not a drain on the economy, a drain on the treasury. In the first year in government, I think we committed over $20 billion, which, when you're looking at annual budgets of, 200 billion is a considerable amount. And it just kept going up. And those commitments, as tough as it was to find that funding, did not even address Gaisuku's debt or any capital investments required to, get the company back to profitability. So, but generally that's my assessment. I'm not going to say if that's a net positive or a net negative. I don't personally think that we were a bad government at all. I think we were a fairly decent government, no better or worse than any other government. I think there were some shortcomings. I mentioned a few specific incidents. And I could, if I really wanted to, I could be a little more critical, and maybe I might be as our conversation ensues. But generally, that's my quick assessment.
There's so many things to unpack there. Because it was interesting that you mentioned the point about sugar. And I just want to make this quick comment before going to the substantive question. It's interesting that you mentioned the point about sugar, because I remember covering those reports extensively, what the government at that time was doing where the sugar industry was concerned. And there was advice on the ground from local experts. There was advice particularly from the IMF, which said that while this is the government's decision, you must place emphasis on a social safety net. What are you going to do with the families, the workers who are dependent on this industry? On one hand, if you want to do close the estates, what's going to happen to them? What protective mechanism? And I think that's where the shortfall for the sugar sector was, and I believe that advice was really ignored, at the expense of leaving
Thousands
of
sugar workers.
families vulnerable, at risk. But it's interesting that you raised that point, and I just wanted to make that brief comment on that. And holistically, looking at the APNU+AFC's track record, when that administration went to the polls in 2020, the electorate said, okay, we are not going to go this route again. And the response from APNU+AFC was that, okay, we will go when I say.
In layman's terms.
Essentially. They continue to hold on to power. But you were one of the first voices to stand up and say, I don't agree with this. What compelled you to stand out as the lone wolf and be comfortable in that space?
It was the right thing to do. It's simple. I mean, first of all,
But
as you
everything
said,
with politics is
electorate-
not simple.
No, I agree with that. But, as you said, electorate decided that, or the majority of the electorate decided that they did not want to vote for us again.
Mhm.
We didn't lose by a large margin. In fact, in absolute terms, we actually gained more votes in 2020 than we did in 2015.
Mhm.
So the actual votes increased, but then, the size of the electorate also increased. So we lost ground, but it wasn't something that we had to be ashamed of. And it wasn't something that was so totally unexpected, because our elections have always been close. So another close election was nothing, it wasn't an unbelievable loss where you could say people had every reason to challenge the results. For instance, there were election results from the 1970s and 1980s, during that period when the PNC was winning elections by huge margins, which were clearly the result of rigging or falsifying the actual results, or some kind of skullduggery, but those did not reflect the will of the electorate, or the way the electorate would have voted. This was not such a case. So there was no basis on which to challenge the fact that we didn't win. In addition to that, the numbers that were presented for Region 4 were clearly the wrong numbers. They didn't match with anything that I had seen beforehand, or that was published, let's say, by the PPP in their statements of polls, or even when we were tabulating beforehand privately. These numbers were literally pulled from a hat just to make up the amount that would take us past, over the 50% mark. And that was obvious to anyone who was paying close attention to the numbers. So I can't look at something like that and be a party to it, or even want to benefit from it. That didn't sit well with me. I feel very strongly about elections and how we treat with the people's will. It's only once every 5 years Guyanese really get a chance to, make a difference, and to deny them, the opportunity to make a difference, whether you agree with what the majority voted for or not, I think is wrong, fundamentally wrong, and it would have been bad for Guyana. It could never be good for a country to have a government that doesn't have the support of more than 50% of its population, especially if they know that, the government is in office or in power by means of some process that outside of the legal process, outside of what, the the GCOM or the whatever the provisions are, found a way to basically cheat the system. It's not going to go down well, and it's not going to take us forward, especially with all the opportunities that are presenting themselves before us today.
And that's also another interesting point, because there were many stakeholders on the ground who were of the firm conviction that Guyana was heading down a very dangerous road. If we had continued down that pathway, it would have been perilous from an economic perspective and even to our international reputation. But one of the key messages that you provided during that time, in addition to honor the will of the people, it was to the APNU+AFC to try as much as possible to regain the trust of the swing vote. Mm-hmm. Do you think they've heeded your advice years later?
No. Simple no. I've seen nothing over the last 5 years from either APNU or the AFC that says to me, look, we are, we've examined the situation, we've done some internal, agonizing and investigations and here's our take on it. I mean, their comfort zone seems to be just ignoring it and hoping it will go away.
Ignoring what?
Ignoring what took place between the elections, March 3rd and August, when
August 2nd.
The new government was sworn, that 5 months period, pretending it didn't happen, and worse yet, even referring to the current government as or questioning the legitimacy of the current government. Mm-hmm. It doesn't help the opposition to do that, and it certainly does not regain the trust of those who are capable of or the support that they lost, put it that way. It doesn't regain that trust.
And if I may, Kiana, I just want to bring you back to what Kiana said earlier. You were the first APNU+AFC official to come out against what was happening at that time. I'm sure there must have been some backlash to that. Was there any?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I don't take seriously, comments on social media. So apart from that, not really. No, and it was period of COVID, so we were on the lockdown was just beginning and getting more and more intense. So there was not a lot of interaction, which probably helped my situation. So I didn't have to go and deal with, or get into situations where there could be some hostility or something. But I honestly, no, I don't feel any backlash apart from comments by a few persons who I probably never took seriously in the first place. So, no.
Okay.
My colleagues and I just want to say this, we've always maintained a good relationship. I didn't attack anyone specifically. And I think, apart from, making a few statements, I don't think any of my close colleagues attacked me personally. They were, I guess they would have said they don't agree with me and I'm entitled to my own views. But, it stopped there. There was no nasty,
criticisms or...
Right. It was no personal. So no, I didn't experience any backlash.
Okay.
And I would do it again. So.
And brings me to my next question. We're heading into another poll September 1st. What do you think about the current government's performance the past 5 years? And what do you think should be in the checklist on citizens as they decide who will steer them to 2030?
Okay, so the current government has been spending money and spending a lot of money. Certainly a lot more money than we were able to spend in our period in government. So I guess any assessment of this government's progress has to do with how they're spending that money, I would say. building a lot of schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, sea defense, cash grants, salary increases, developing housing areas, airstrips. So a lot of infrastructure spending, and also some spending directed at increasing disposable income. I think that's generally good. We have to wait to see whether that spending then delivers on their intended outcomes or optimizes outcomes. But generally, I think that's where the money should be spent. So I will treat it as a positive, for now.
Mm-hmm.
Also, on the positives, I like the low carbon development strategies emphasis on monetizing our standing forests and our ecosystems and our biodiversity. And I like the fact that we were able to update the LCDS to find a mechanism to actually get our carbon credits registered and certified and sold on international carbon markets. I think it's a positive. It's not something that gets around a lot, but we've actually earned money from it, and we will earn some more money from this, and that's why I'm raising it. If it was just a document on paper and it didn't bring in any returns, I would have had to wait and see, but it's actually proving successful. I'm sure there's room for improvement, but I think that's quite positive, and I think that line of thinking could lead to lots of other developments of a similar nature. Positive again, before I go to the negatives. And this is just a perception, but I like the way the government, and I think in particular the president, has been showing support for a wide range of activities, whether it's cultural activities or business activities or sporting activities. He has made himself available to cut ribbons and to, attend events and show support. And I think, especially for young people, young Guyanese getting involved in whatever you're involved in, that feeling that you're being noticed and that at the highest levels it's being promoted and championed, I think is a good feeling and encourages people to participate in whatever activities are out there. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to get a chance to, have their little event attended to
Correct.
by the president or government official, but I like the energy that is coming out of that. When it comes to negatives, like every government, I'm seeing questionable contracts being awarded where there were clear irregularities in the awards of those contracts. I am also hearing a lot of chatter about, corruption in the procurement system. No evidence. This is just anecdotal. People are telling you what they have to go through to get a contract or to get paid or to, there seems to be a lot of, that's not under control, put it that way. And I think that's something that this government needs to bring under control. Now, there's procurement fraud in every country. So we're not necessarily unique in that regard, but I think it's something that we need to work on, because with all the money that we have today and coming down, in the future, we need to make sure we get value for that money. We need to make sure that our procurements deliver on their intended outcomes. And I don't think you get that by not following the correct process by not ensuring that you have the best person or the best company for the job. Outside of that, I am seeing a lack of enforcement of lots of rules and regulations, and it's very blatant and obvious, let's say, on the roadways. There's just lawlessness on the roads. There's lawlessness in communities. We see almost every week there's someone writing a letter about noise nuisance, basically loud music and inappropriate activities in residential neighborhoods.
Yeah, these things
Carrying
happen.
on into the morning hours. I'm still seeing bad behavior when it comes to dumping garbage and just, littering the place. And those are areas that we need to work on. I don't think enough has been done in those areas. And I think those are very visible and very obvious areas, and they define you as a country. We're trying to promote tourism. We can't promote tourism if we're seen as a unruly, disorderly, filthy place. We have to do a little more, and it all comes down to enforcement. I think the laws are in place, but there seems to be a problem with enforcement. So, that's in a nutshell a quick assessment of what I see, or my feeling of how this government in this term. I'm looking forward maybe to better in the next term, improvements in the bad areas and continuity in the good areas.
Yeah, but to be fair, some of the issues like garbage and the reckless behavior on the roads, those are issues that have been plaguing us for years. I mean, the APNU+AFC, the PPP, that whenever they're in power, it's something they've always grappled with in terms of getting the Ghana police force to enforce the laws and to hold people accountable. So yeah, that's something I definitely agree with when it comes to the reckless behavior on the roads and the garbage situation that we're facing.
And just to add to that too, one of the important things, and I love that you raised that point about procurement fraud, it is not something that anyone can say, it does not exist. There is an Auditor General report that comes out every year, and it outlines that there are procurement weaknesses or there are procurement breaches. And that very report outlines what has been rectified and what remains to be addressed. And as we continue to grow as an oil republic with more oil revenues flowing into our budgets, putting those security measures to ensure that issues of breaches or irregularities are minimized as much as possible, I think it would be in our interest. And I think I have also seen from the Auditor General's report that we are heading in that direction, but there is still work to be done. And I think if we are to truly talk about Guyana's development, it's good to also highlight the areas in which we're doing well. And it's also a good thing to highlight the areas where we still have some work to do, and the energies are being dedicated to that cause. So I'm in agreement with you. There is a number of things which we can be proud of, and there are things that we do have to work on. Yeah. So, Mr. Gaskin, as we're talking about the Oil Republic, the APNU+AFC was instrumental in helping us to kick off the oil and gas economy that we see today. And when I say helping us with that, I mean in terms of the famous Stabroek Block agreement, the Stabroek Block production sharing agreement. And I want to know, what is your take years later? As you're well aware, this contract has been the focus of much criticism about the improved terms that we could have secured in terms of a higher royalty and in terms of other tax benefits and so forth. And there continues to be a call for unilateral renegotiation, even though the contract clearly spells out what are the consequences, the perilous consequences that could befall us if we are to head in that direction. But in the space of all of this, what's your take on how we have managed the Oil Republic and the gains from that contract?
Okay, well, let's start with the contract, which is controversial. And let me just make my position clear. It's not the first time I'm saying this. I may be a lone voice or one of the few voices saying this, but this is what I genuinely believe. And I said it back in 2016 or 2017. Yes, I believe we could have gotten better terms, fiscal terms from that contract. But I think that contract I don't think it's a bad contract. I think the circumstances that we were in at the time, I think if you look at the bigger picture, everything combined, I think it's a good contract. No, like I said, we could have gotten more, but no one knows how much more. If we knew that, we could have played hardball to squeeze more out of it. I'm speaking purely of the fiscal terms and not so much of like some of the other areas, like the environmental areas and little
the parent guarantees, insurance, and so forth.
Right. But the money I said is more money than we've ever had before. The same contract, right? That we've been kicking about and beating up on. It's bringing us all this money today and tomorrow. Money that we never had in our wildest dreams. We could not have, envisaged this scenario. And also, what we could not have envisaged was that after the one successful discovery, there would have been another 40 or so discoveries. And I'll go out on a limb and I'll say this. Those who are, it's everyone's right to judge the contract and complain. I don't have a problem with that. And if you ask me, would I like to see us get more money? Yes, I will. But you can't divorce the fact that a contract was signed, which was fairly generous to the oil company. What did that generosity or what did that generous contract do? It allowed them to invest a lot more. They would not have been 40 discoveries if we had a contract that was, with at least 10% royalties. And, they would not have been 40 discoveries because oil companies will invest in areas that will bring the most profits. They have interests all over the world. They're going to invest where they see the best returns. Our scenario provided them with the best returns. And now we have this pipeline of projects that are going to be developed over the next 10 years or so. I think it's a good thing. We could have had a contract, maybe, I know Kaichur News always like to compare contracts like Suriname or Ghana. Both of those countries discovered oil long before us. Add up the production in both those countries, and it's less than maybe a third of what we're producing now. And we're still growing. And even what they may have in the pipeline, I don't think they have new investment agreements or new projects that have been okayed for development. Or maybe one or two, but they're not getting the investments that we are getting. So you can't divorce that and think that, okay, we have, let's say, 20-something billion barrels of oil. So if we apply a higher royalty to those 20-something billion barrels of oil and subtract what we're getting now, that's how much we're losing. Now, that's foolishness to go back and want to change one element of the scenario and expect all the others to remain the same. Things don't work like that. So That's the first thing we have to see. The second thing, if you ask me about renegotiation, unilateral renegotiation, how are we going to do that? I've listened to people calling for renegotiation for the last 5 years or so more. I've not heard one coherent strategy. How are we going to get Exxon to the negotiating table?
Correct.
If you come with a strategy because if Exxon is not inclined or does not want to negotiate, then we have a dispute. And if we have a dispute, there's a process. And that process culminates in arbitration, not arbitration in Guyana, but arbitration at an international, I think it's the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. And a panel is appointed and they will adjudicate and make a decision. We are bound by that decision. That panel is not going to, award us higher royalties or anything because they feel sorry for us or because they think it's not fair. That's not how things work. So if you come with a strategy that says, well, look, it's got to be clever, it's got to be well thought out. Here's how we can get them to the negotiating table. And it works. I would support that. Also, what are your objectives? What is it that you would like to renegotiate? You have to define what you want. I've not seen, 10% royalty from 2% to 10%. Why would any company agree to that?
But you have the AFC, the party that you were from, saying that it has seen the light, smelled the coffee, and it's ready to renegotiate. And that's its promise to the electorate.
Sorry, that should have been said when we were in government. My view doesn't change with the political, wind, the direction of the political breeze or whatever. I've held this view from day one. I continue to hold it. I'm not inflexible. If there's new information, I'm open to it and I can change my view. There is no new information per se. I don't know why it's all of a sudden a good idea to renegotiate unilaterally. I don't have a problem with them coming up with a way of inviting Exxon to the table. But if you're going to tell me you're going to renegotiate, tell me what you're going to do when Exxon says we don't want to renegotiate.
And they've
What's
said for
the
5
strategy?
years, no deal.
Right. What are you putting on the table to bring Exxon, to negotiate, to renegotiate? And that's not been made clear by any of the proponents of renegotiations. It just seems to be we calling for this, we calling for that, we pushing people towards renegotiation. It has to be carefully thought out. You have to develop some strategy for bringing them to the table, and you have to define the objectives. And I haven't heard any of that. So to me, it's just noise right now. When it stops being noise and it starts making sense, I will listen,
Got you. Fariza, I'll let you have the closing question.
We were talking about the promises being made by the AFC. Now I want to talk about the promises being made by APNU. They launched their campaign recently. We've heard so many things that they want to do if they're voted into office. One of them being increasing the threshold to $400,000, increasing pension to $100,000, increasing public servant salaries by 35%, and the big ticket promise, $1 million for each household. What is your take on that?
I didn't actually listen to the launch, and so I didn't actually hear these for myself. I've seen them reported on, but I have a number of issues with that. And you asked me about APNU, so I have to address APNU. And I'm not saying that this may not be the same with other political players, but when you start making promises, campaign promises, they need to be backed up by something, right? Whether it's some political ideology, some overarching goals and objectives, some mission something that tells us, well, what is motivating it? Why are you doing this? There are a number of documents that I am surprised over the last 5 years, I have not heard APNU or even the AFC refer to. Let's say the Green State Development Strategy. Why would a political party that spent time in office and developed this, big weighty document, which is, it's a good document, it's a good development strategy. Why would you not review it, update it, and use that as the basis for your political agenda? So why are you pulling stuff out of a hat? Also, APNU has available a lot of work that's done by Professor Clive Thomas about the cash grant, the so-called Buxton proposal.
Yes, the $1 million.
But it's $1 million. But if you read his entire proposal, it's not something, we're going to give you $1 million. It's $5,000 US when we start producing 1.5 million barrels a day. Right?
And for every poor household too.
I think it's for every household, I think it's for every household.
Yeah, I remember covering
the thing
that.
about it is that it's supported by a document that's coherent, that's rational, and that makes the case.
Yeah.
I don't get the impression that, these promises are backed by anything, substantial and well thought out. I think they are promises, line items. For me, I'm not interested in hearing, little line item promises. I want to know what your bigger picture is, what your priorities are, and then you can come with your line items and tie them to, the bigger picture, and also support them with, everything you say you do. People don't want to read no long document, but it must exist. For those who want to get a better idea or want to convince themselves that you know what you're talking about, you have to support it, with some clear policy and the objectives and everything, so people who want to know can understand what you're really doing. The average person probably don't want to know. You said 400,000. What was the cash grant? $1 million?
$1 million.
$1 million cash grant. Sounds good. You might get a few votes. For me, it doesn't work for me. I'm not interested in hearing promises. I want to understand what you're about and why you're making those promises before I start taking it seriously.
Do you think these promises, though, very quickly, do you think these promises are enough? This promise of more money, more handouts, it's enough to gain them that swing vote?
Promises will get you some votes, but I've already commented on what I think the outcome of this election is going to be. And I'm not going to repeat myself, but I don't see that outcome changing because of these promises. I think, yes, you can make last-minute campaign promises, you'll get a little bit of traction, but by and large, people will vote for you based on your performance over the last 5 years, and not be too swayed by, what you tell us, the sweeteners that you hand out in the last few weeks of your campaign.
Okay. Mr. Gaskin, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I think we had a very interesting discussion, and it was very nuanced because there were a number of things that you touched on regarding the development, the prospects for Guyana 2025-2030 that were truly thought-provoking. So thank you for your contributions.
Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, thank you as well for joining us. We hope that you found this discussion as interesting and as enlightening as we did. Be sure to follow us next week, same time, same place, as we bring you more insights regarding Guyana's development from all vantage points. I'm Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.